Hi everyone, welcome to the Binding Coil of Bahamut turn 6, or Coil 2 turn 1 if you prefer. This is the first turn in the next raid you'll encounter as of patch 2.2 through the Maelstrom. In this first turn we go up against the daunting Rafflesia. My name is MTQcapture and I'll be your raid guide. The first thing you'll notice about Raffi is the platform we're fighting on is really small. To top that off, throughout the encounter we'll have to deal with an even smaller area, so stacking and limiting your movement will greatly increase your chances of killing this boss. There is a tank swap mechanic, and tanks should expect to provoke off of each other at either 2 or 3 stacks, depending on what your healers are comfortable with. To limit the burden on our healers, we chose to switch at 2 stacks. This ability, called Bloody Caress, is a pretty spicy cleave, so positioning is vital in the first 2 phases. Tanks need to be careful not to needlessly move the boss, and all tank swaps should be as seamless as possible. The rest of the group should stay behind Raffi as much as they can. We begin by pulling and tanking Raffi in the center of the room. The first mechanic you'll encounter is called Thorny Vine. This vine will chain a number of players together throughout the encounter and will do damage over time the longer you're chained together. To counter this, the affected players need to run away from whomever they're chained to as fast as possible. The trick is to run away at a full 180 degrees. Anything less and the vines will break slower. For anyone not good at math, you need to run in such a way that the vine is sticking straight out of your butt. This will take some practice, especially later on when one might be chained to multiple people. The next thing you'll have to deal with is growth. In each growth cycle, 3 dark matter bulbs will sprout from the ground. These can either all sprout around the outer edge of the room, or 2 around the edge and 1 directly in the middle. Over time, these bulbs will grow briar patches around them that get bigger and bigger until they finally disappear. Standing in these will do some damage and will also render you immune to an ability called Devour, which we'll get into soon. When these bulbs come out, the most important thing to do is to destroy the one that spawns in the middle, right underneath the boss. You want to get this down as soon as possible to avoid any briar patches in the center of the room. If there are no bulbs in the middle, thank your lucky stars and keep burning the boss. Let's take a quick look at positioning here. Throughout the majority of the fight, the group is stacked behind Raffi. As soon as the bulbs come up, tanks should turn the boss so that her butt is directly in line with a fresh bulb growth. The group will reposition behind Raffi in between the boss and the fresh patch. This is in preparation for the upcoming Devour mechanic. For every second Thorny Vine, Raffi will also mark up a player with a huge yellow flower. After a few moments, the boss will turn towards that marked player and attempt to devour anyone in range. As soon as the yellow marker comes out, the affected player needs to immediately move into the briar patch that's directly behind Raffi. With your original positioning, this should be the closest patch to your group's stack-up spot. All other players will move in front of Raffi to avoid getting devoured while breaking their thorny vines. Let's look at Devour. Raffi will turn towards the marked player and will suck anyone in a wide frontal cone. For every devoured player, Raffi will gain a damage increasing buff that will last the remainder of the fight. Immediately after Devouring, Raffi will cast Spit, a massive AoE blast that will hit the entire room and will throw out any devoured players. It is essential to control the stacking buff on Raffi. More than 3 or 4 stacks and your healers won't be able to keep up with the incoming damage. That said, it's incredibly important that players avoid getting devoured until absolutely necessary. Let's take a look at how we do this. Here we are in our default position. Tanks have the boss in line with a fresh briar patch, and the raid is waiting patiently for the Devourer. Thorns come up and players begin to move to break those. One of these players will be marked for Devour by the glowing yellow symbol above their head. That player will move into the briar patch and hang out. The other players will run in front of the boss to avoid getting caught in the suck zone, all while continuing to break those thorns. Raffi will spin around towards the marked player and begin to devour anyone in that area. Since the briar patch makes anyone immune to the suck zone, we know our marked player won't be devoured and Raffi won't get any additional stacks. Since no other player should be anywhere near that area, no one else will get devoured. As soon as Raffi begins to cast Spit, all players can run back into position. Be sure to get there as fast as possible. After Spit, Raffi will resume her normal cleave rotation and you don't want to accidentally get chopped up. This is essentially the first phase. Before we continue, let's do one more quick recap. Tanks will keep Raffi positioned in the center of the room, turning her as necessary when new bulbs spawn. The rest of the group will stack behind the boss in between the briar patch. Players will break thorns as soon as possible by running directly away from one another. Every other thorn spawn, a player will be marked by Raffi to be devoured. That player will run into the briar patch while the rest of the raid runs to the opposite end of the platform. Raffi will turn to the marked player and devour anyone in sight. At this point, no one should be getting devoured. Raffi will then spit, shield and heal through this and move back into position behind her. This will continue until about 70%, at which point we'll move into the second phase. This next phase is a continuation of the same mechanics with a few extra abilities thrown in. Raffi begins the second phase by casting Blighted Bouquet. This cast will destroy anyone that is moving or attacking or even breathing at the end of the cast. The best way to handle this is to put the boss on focus so you know exactly when the cast is happening. Halfway through that cast, all players should mask their escape key or turn around or do whatever it takes to stop attacking. Do not move. If your big toe twitches, you will die. Once the cast bar is gone, you are free to resume your assault. The next new ability is Honey Glazed, a debuff that will target a random player. As with anything covered in honey, that player will soon attract a bee. This bee will fixate on the glazed player and must be destroyed as soon as possible. Similar to the hornets in the Sunken Temple of Karn, if this mob is not killed in time, it will destroy its target with final sting. Also, remember to stop for blight as necessary during this phase. Even though you kill the bee, the player is still covered in honey and will continuously cause bees to spawn until it is removed. There are 2 ways to remove this debuff. The first way is to die. Obviously, you really don't want that to happen. The second way is to have Raffi devour the debuff off of the player. That means the next time Devour is going out, the person with the debuff needs to purposely get eaten by Raffi. Handle the phase in the same way until the next Devour after the bee is killed. At this point, the marked player will run into the briar patch as usual, but the glazed player will hang out in front of them, ready to be devoured. Raffi will devour the glazed player and spit them out clean. Should you fail to get devoured, you'll end up spawning an extra bee, at the same time that another player will get another stack of honey, spawning yet another bee. At this gear level, this is a wipe, as you'll find it very difficult to keep up with the mechanics. Let's recap that quickly. Player X will get glazed, spawning a bee that fixates on her until it is destroyed. All players need to switch to that bee. Always remember to be careful with Blighted Bouquet during this phase. Once the bee is down, do what you did in phase 1, but the glazed player needs to get ready to be devoured. Raffi will mark up the devoured player, who will run into the usual briar patch, and the glazed player will hang out in between the briar patch and Raffi to ensure that they will be devoured. Devour will go out, the player will be spit out, and everyone can move back into position. Obviously, if the glazed player is the same player to be marked for Devour, they don't have to stand in that briar patch. This phase will repeat until about 40%. It's important to go into the last phase with no bees and no honey debuffs out, otherwise you will continuously spawn bees. Depending on your raid damage, you should get 1 or 2 bees during the second phase. Hold off on boss damage until the last debuff is devoured, and then push the boss until the final phase. The last phase will begin with Leaf Storm, an AoE blast that causes raid-wide damage and spawns 3 slug adds. Shield and heal through this. Now, this last phase can be handled in one of 2 ways: the burn strat and the actual intended realsies strat. Since most players will attempt the burn strat, let's take a look at that first. After Leaf Storm, 3 slug adds will spawn. These slugs are essential to the intended strat, but we don't need them for the burn strat. As soon as Leaf Storm is cast, use a mage limit break in the middle to immediately destroy the adds. Everyone else is burning the boss. The group remains stacked in the center until the boss casts Acid Rain. This will place 3 ground AoEs under 3 random players. Once you see the telegraphs, you can run out of the center. The Acid Rain will spawn 3 acidic honeys that will periodically cast Acid Cloud, a debuff that will continuously increase the damage you take from each stack of Acid Cloud. This is where the DPS check comes in. At 10 stacks of Acid Cloud, you will wipe. This gives you a little under 2 minutes to destroy Raffi once you enter phase 3. Tanks will pull the boss to the outer edge. Raffi will no longer cleave, instead she will cast an ability called Swarm on her primary target. Swarm places a debuff on the tank that will do a high amount of damage after its duration. The damage output is very similar to Twintania's death sentence, and you can tank swap to handle it. However, we do prefer to cool down through the swarms while the off tank pumps out as much DPS as they can to push our overall raid damage to the limit. Raffi will continue to cast Thorny Vines on players, and these need to be broken as soon as possible. Every other Thorny Vine, she will again mark up an individual player with Rotten Stench, and then blast them with a massive laser in that direction. The damage from this ability is split among any players it hits. The way we handle this is to break our thorns in a straight line directly behind the boss, so all players are in that line and the damage from the laser blast is split between everyone. Continue handling these mechanics until the boss is down. As for the actual intended strat, I don't really have any clear footage of how to do it since we prefer to burn through phase 3, but I'll give you a general idea of what happens. Once Leaf Storm is cast, the off-tank will grab 3 slugs to spawn. The raid will burn down 2 of these 3 slugs while dodging Acid Rain. Once the acidic honeys spawn, the off-tank will bring the surviving slug to the honeys. The slug will devour all 3 honeys and turn into a super slug. With the acidic honeys gone, you no longer have to worry about the stacks of Acid Cloud, making this far easier and less stress-inducing than the burn strat. Once the honeys are gone and the super slug is nice and fat, limit break and burn the big slug down. If you don't kill the slug in time, you will wipe, so be sure to get him down ASAP. Once the slug is down, you can resume burning Raffi while handling the Thorny Vines and the lasers as you would in the burn strat. Eventually, more slugs and honeys will spawn and you can handle these in the same way. The phase repeats until Raffi is down. As stated earlier, most groups do prefer the burn strat, and with more and more gear each week it'll get easier and easier to get through it this way. Do whatever works best for your raid group. And there you have it, Rafflesia down. Congratulations on your new loot and get ready for turn 7. If you have any questions or comments, please don't hesitate to let me know. As always, thanks for watching. Till next time.